Hey everybody, it's Kevin from Storytellers Union, hopping on here in front of the family Christmas tree to say, I hope you and your family and loved ones are having a great holiday season. And also, this means it's near the end of the year. So it is time once again for Kevin's best albums list. This is something that proved pretty popular on our social channels last year, so we're doing it again on our social channels. If this is the first time you joining us for this, a little bit of background. This is an annual tradition, something I've been doing for more than 20 years as a fan of music, a consumer of music, a critic of music. It started actually as that critic of music, doing magazine articles, freelancing, talking about entertainment. Because of space restrictions in a magazine, I think the first year I did my list, it was like 5 albums long, maybe even 3. It's been as much as 50, and the last couple of years we've settled on 30, which is what I'm doing again this year. Once I stopped doing it for public consumption, for profit, as it were, I brought it internally and started doing it just because I had enjoyed so much the process of trying to decide what I thought was a good listen. And I began putting it on my Facebook or YouTube or various places. A couple years ago, we decided that we're talking music here, so broader concerns of Storytellers Union is we are about our channels are about us, but it can also be about music in general, things we love, things that we're inspired by, and things that you may also love. And so I really appreciate the dialogue I get from doing these lists, hearing what other people like, what I missed, what people didn't like that I thought was worthy. So definitely, as we go through these, let us know what you think was some of the best albums to come out in 2022. So with all of that background said, I am going to start this year where we ended last year. Last year, I did my list counting backwards from 30 all the way to 1, and then mentioned my honorable mentions. I'm going to start this year with honorable mentions. Now, things that are in my honorable mentions is not just albums that didn't make the top 30 cut, though there are a few of those because 30 is kind of tight when so much music is available for consumption. There are also just things I don't consider for my albums list, and that is because I usually look at full-length albums, original material. So this counts things like compilations or box sets or live albums or other things that may be worth hearing, but I don't consider apples to apples when I'm compiling my overall list. So let's start with a few of those that I just did not even consider, and that would be some reissues. The Beatles Revolver box set is a must for any Beatles fan. The last few years has seen a number of these Beatles box sets, looking back at the older classic albums, packaging them up with outtakes, fresh mixes, and yes, it is for diehards, but this can be enjoyed by the casual fan as well. The Revolver mix that they have sounds fantastic. So definitely put that under the tree for any Beatles fan on your shopping list. Speaking of classic bands and classic venues, we got Tom Petty live at the Fillmore, 1997. Tom brought his Heartbreakers to this historic venue and played a series of shows. This box set cherry picks and compiles a lot of that material. And yes, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers are a fantastic live band. Goes without saying, if you're a Tom Petty fan, you're going to get versions of the hits here that you may have heard on many other live albums or compilations through the years. I know he did a massive box set, the estate did, of a lot of live material before, but this is different. This is the band cutting loose. This is the band not just doing the hits. This is the band doing the deep cuts. This is the band, it really is. You don't think the Heartbreakers is a jam band, but they jam on this because they're loose. It's a lot of it seems more off the cuff, full of covers. You can hear them doing everything from the Rolling Stones to Little Richard. So if you want to hear a different side of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, definitely pick up this box set. the last box set I'm going to talk about in my honorable mentions, I even have to pull this one out if I can lift it, because this is a hefty big boy. Wilco, the Wilco Yankee Hotel Foxtrot box set is prime. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. It was a landmark album in indie rock. It was a landmark album for do-it-yourselfers, which is obviously something that we here at Storytellers Union can appreciate. This box set packages up the band's best album on its 20th anniversary and does so gloriously. There's multiple incarnations of this. You can get just the album remaster. You can get one that's just several disc long with some outtakes and various things. I went, since this is one of my favorite bands and my favorite album of theirs, the full shebang. This is the 11 LP 1 CD version of the album, and it comes complete with several live shows, multiple disc of outtakes in addition to just the album being remastered itself. A wonderful essay and a beautiful hardcover book that has tons of photos and things, a really good look historically at that period of time. This was a make it or break it album, and all the music that's collected on here is beyond what you would normally find with these big expanded editions. They oftentimes can be fans only, where you have to be hardcore to listen to 6-7 versions of the same song and notice what the minute differences are. These are not minute differences. There are completely different reimaginings of the songs from Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. This album was famously torturous for the band. They spent a lot of time trying these songs in many different styles with a multitude of instruments. So you may hear a song 4 or 5 times and none of the 5 sound anything alike. And all of the 5 will sound like something that could be considered complete versions that could have, in an alternate universe, wound up on the album proper. So if you want to really get a look at the many pathways that Wilco could have taken with Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, absolutely, this has my highest recommendation. A few other honorable mentions that I'm putting on the honorable mentions list and not even considering for my other list because they're just too short. I'm looking at full-length albums, right? There's a couple of EPs that I want to make sure make my honorable mentions list and let you all know that they are worth your attention. War and Treaty are one of my favorite Americana bands. They mix gospel and soul, and they do it with such sincerity and heart. They have 2 of the most beautiful voices you'll ever hear. A husband and wife duo, when they sing together, will melt your heart. They had an EP called the Blank Page EP. And if the full-length album that is supposedly coming out in the spring, when I saw them live, they mentioned March-ish, if that's still the case. If it's anything like this, you absolutely are going to be in for an early candidate for 2023 album, top albums of the year, because this EP is prime. Also prime EP that is worth your attention. Check out Leon Bridges and Krungben's album, EP, I guess, Texas Moon. If you combined it with their earlier effort from a few years ago, Texas Sun, you would have a full-length album. As Leon has delved more and more into pop in his solo work, this collaboration with the instrumental trio of Krungben has proven something as a bit of an outlier in that it has grounded him less in the pop world that he has most often been associated with lately. And for them, as an instrumental trio that's big on world music and psychedelia and mixing a lot of different sounds, it's grounded them in having to meet a vocalist where he is. And so I honestly feel like this is one of those rare collaborations that doesn't sound more like one artist than the other artist. It's truly something that I don't think either would have been able to accomplish quite so much in this style on their own. Very unique, very moody. If you are familiar with Texas Sun, the brightness of that one is definitely this one more downbeat, more melancholy, beautiful, and definitely worth a listen as well. Now I'm going to get into a couple of albums that could have made my albums of the year a list if that just had more room or would have expanded it. But Eddie Vedder, Earthling. So the solo work of Eddie Vedder thus far has been sparse and mostly been, he's had a rather acoustic take on one of his solo efforts, but this rocks hard and has a lot of collaborations with a lot of his famous friends, and definitely sounds like something that is apart from what he could have done in Pearl Jam. So in that sense, it's a true solo album, and much I would say that there's some stadium style rock in here. Like Eddie is going for the singing to the rafters in this one. So if you're an Eddie Vedder fan at all, and kind of miss those early Pearl Jam days where he seemed to care a little more about singles than he has on the latter years, check this out. It's definitely different and worth your attention. Jack White, Entering Heaven Alive. This isn't the last you're going to hear, Mr. White. I'll just say this one made my honorable mentions list, but it's not the only album he did in 2022. He did two albums. One was a wild, raucous, full-throated band affair, and this one is the quieter, more subdued counterpoint to that album. They could not be more different. They both are absolutely worth your listening. But Entering Heaven Alive is the mellower of the two and the one that made my honorable mentions list. So Death Cab for Cutie, they had Asphalt Meadows released in 2022. And if you're a Death Cab fan at all, you usually are either early Death Cab or once Death Cab became indie stalwarts. Which side of that divide are you falling upon? Do you wish they were more like that eccentric indie band that got critics' attention, or the band that began to have hits and climb up the lineup posters of festivals around the world? This gives you a bit of both. There is more of the eccentricities in this work than they have had in a very, very long time, but it does not neglect the hooks or some of the poppiness that they have been more known for in their latter work. I think it's a perfect marriage of the two styles of the band, and was actually quite a surprise for me because I had not given Death Cab quite as much attention in recent years. Rhett Miller. Rhett Miller is best known as the lead singer of the Old 97s, old favorite of mine and Jer's. But Rhett, when he has done solo work, and he's done many albums now, he has sort of a parallel career to his time in Old 97s. There's oftentimes in these albums, they're well written because the man is just a beautiful detailer of the human condition. But oftentimes I kind of wish that the Old 97s were playing behind him, because I love that band, and there's many of the songs on his solo records that I think, these could have probably been Old 97 songs. That's not the case with The Misfit. The Misfit, his 2022 album, sounds nothing like the Old 97s, nor does it sound anything like that previously exists in Rhett Miller's solo career as well. In fact, if you didn't know it was Rhett Miller, there are times you would listen to it and wonder who it is. So you have to sort of meet this one on its own terms. If you go in with any preconceived notions as an Old 97s fan or a Rhett Miller fan, you might end up disappointed, because that's not what you're getting. What you're getting is great on its own terms, but it's definitely something that he could not have done with the band or anything that he's attempted before, which makes it the perfect fodder for a solo work. Titus Andronicus, The Will to Live. I think if I had more time with this one, it might actually have cracked my list. But this is a punk band who followed for a while. They strayed a bit from where their roots came from, tried a few things. They've gone back and intentionally went out and decided they were wanting to make as hook-filled, popular album as they can. Not popular in they think it's going to sell, but in their terms, like that mainstream rock records from their youth that was classic song by song, all the way beginning to end, full of things that could have been singles. Obviously, this is an alternate universe where this kind of rock and roll still would be popular. But if you could imagine rolling back the clock 20 or so years, it is not hard to think of this album having some heavy rotation on rock radio at the time. And that is all meant as a big compliment to Titus Andronicus. Check out The Will to Live. A fantastic Negretto, White Jesus, Black Problems, a very eclectic mix of funk and soul and rock with a message, a very pertinent to today message. So definitely check that one out as well. Hooray for the Riff Raff, Life on Earth. Didn't quite make the cut, but man, if I could have just extended it a few, this singer-songwriter, indie rock, definitely something that I would highly recommend, as is something that really broke my heart to not include on my top 30s list. But Ockerville River is a band that I have been into for many, many years. And even though the Ockerville name is often, Ockerville River's name has been on all the albums to date, the band is less a band than it is the genius of Will Sheff and castmates that sort of rotate in and out. He's never been, for whatever reason, he says, brave enough to put something under his own name, even though he is the one who most often is doing all the instruments as well as all of the writing. This is the first album he has put out under his own moniker, and Nothing Special is a title you should not take to heart, because this album is anything but that. And if you are a fan of Ockerville River, then you will certainly be a fan of this. It is an Ockerville River album and everything but name only. Band of Horses, Things Are Great. I have honestly ignored most of the last few Band of Horses albums, as they seem to be struggling for an identity. If you like the Band of Horses that first hit the scene, playing that very echoey My Morning Jacket, reminiscent, vocally wise anyway, of indie rock, very spacious sounding, very much very big choruses. They've strayed away from that over the recent years. This is a return to form, and sometimes when you try to repeat yourself, you just end up making a pale imitation of what you used to be. And this is not parody. This is an album that actually is hard for me to leave off. That's just how good the top 30 is going to be in my mind, that an album this strong, a return to form for a band that I loved their first two albums, and then they sort of lost me. If you like those first two albums of Band of Horses, pick up Things Are Great. And before I wrap up my honorable mentions, I have one more, and this will take some of the mystery out of the top 30. If for those of you who just think that, well, any year that Bruce Springsteen releases an album, Kevin is going to include it at the very top of his list. Surprise. Only the Strong Survive definitely has a must listen appeal to it in my mind, and I would recommend it highly to anyone. I actually just did not include it on my list because it's a covers record, and I do think it's a bit apples and oranges to compare a covers record and try to equate it with an album of original work. I've had a lot of people who, because of the fact that it's Bruce doing soul music that is completely written by other people, made famous by other people, or in some cases just obscurities, that he wanted folks to know. I've been asked a lot what I thought of the album, and so one of the reasons I wanted to include it on my honorable mentions list is to, one, take the mystery out of anyone thinking that I had it in my top albums, as well as to say, when I first heard about the album, I will admit I was not super stoked, and that was nothing against the concept. It was just not the announcement I was anticipating. There are several box sets, outtakes. There's several projects that Bruce fans know are in the works, some reissues, some anniversary celebrations, album after album after album of unreleased material that we know are out there and that Bruce has has in interviews mentioned working on. So when we knew that a project was coming, a lot of fans were excited by something that was not Bruce doing other people's songs. That said, once I got over that original, like, shrug, and actually heard the album proper, it works beautifully to his style. Covers have always been part of the Bruce Springsteen mythos, right from the very start of his bar band days and through his early live performances. If you've ever seen the E Street Band live, especially in the last few years, when fans bring signs for rarities and covers and things the bands maybe have never even accomplished or attempted before, and they'll turn on a dime and pull a sign out of a crowd and pull off these live performances. Covers have always been a part of the Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band story. He is not accompanied here by the E Street Band. I do think the album would have benefited from a live band approach, but this was his COVID album. This was him in lockdown working with producer and them doing most of the instruments and just having fun, which is sometimes, to Bruce's own acknowledgement, not what he is trying to do in the studio. He tortures himself and everyone in the studio making what is many times very serious work. For him to just take songs from the 60s, 70s, and a few stragglers from the 80s and even the 2000s, but mostly centered on the 60s and 70s soul music, things that he loves and wanted to present just as a way of having fun in these lighter times. It works beautifully. It plays to the early sound of the Jersey Shore. So if you like that sound, that Southside Johnny sound, the early Springsteen sound, that's this sound. And he does it wonderfully. And fortunately, at least in this volume, he does not rely just on the big hits of the era that we've heard 1,000 times. He is very, if you've listened to his radio show, he's a good curator of music. So he has been very intent on presenting things that he felt were overlooked or maybe underheard or maybe something that has not been done or covered to death for many, many a year. So it's a shows off his great ear for curating these type of works. And definitely an honorable mention, but not on my top 30 list. That will start in the next installment. So please stay tuned for that. I want to try to get a few out before the end of the year. And then we'll finish my list early in 2023 as we continue to count down, starting with number 30 and then all the way to number 1 on the best albums of 2022 list. Thank you all for tuning in.